I'm sorry, but this doesn't feel like an actual title fight. It's more like a friendly game where everybody's just trying not to hurt each other's feelings. Maybe that's just me, but watching McLaren execute a Hungary 2024 rerun at Monza this year made me question whether this is an actual battle or whether it's charity. And just in case you don't know what I'm referring to, towards the end of the Italian Grand Prix, both McLarens hadn't pit yet and were due to make a stop. Some discussions were taking place over the radio between Lando and his race engineer about potentially pitting Oscar first to avoid Leclerc from getting ahead of him. Norris agrees and Piastri comes in for his stop. Lando then pits a lap later, but this time the mechanics get it totally wrong and he gets undercut by his teammate, which leaves McLaren in a very similar predicament to last year's Hungarian Grand Prix, where they essentially had to beg and guilt-trip Norris to give the position back to Piastri for his maiden win in Formula 1. But in this scenario, there were a few differences. Number one is that in Hungary last year, the undercut was so powerful, Lando was able to get ahead through pitting early. Whereas in this case, his slow stop is what caused him to lose out to his teammate. And as Piastri said in the moment, it's just one of those things. Furthermore, both drivers are competing against each other for the World Championship, which means every single point counts. And it's not Oscar's fault that Lando had a slow pit stop. But anyway, the Australian gets told to give back the position and he fulfills the request. I assume to maintain the healthy relationship that exists within the McLaren garage. But as a spectator and fan of that race, it just felt like a complete killjoy. I thought to myself, finally, we could get one of the drivers disobeying team orders and stamping their authority. Especially for Oscar as the championship leader, I really thought that he'd refuse and create a bit of drama. But I guess everybody is trying to keep the peace. And I do get why this makes sense. However, I'm just thinking to myself what other world champions would have done in that situation. For instance, let's say you put Verstappen in Piastri's position. Oh my days, this dude would rather crash and double DNF than let you by because of a team mistake. Or what about Prime Vettel? I'm thinking about Malaysia 2013, the Multi-21 incident. This man did not care whatsoever. And I'll never forget what he said after that. We were racing, I was faster, I passed him and won. Prime Hamilton? Yeah, there's not a single chance, especially when his teammate was named Nico Rosberg. I remember races like Hungary 2014 and Abu Dhabi 2016, ignoring team orders, complete ruthlessness. And there might be some of you thinking, well, what about Hungary 2017? Lewis let Valtteri past in that race. But that situation is entirely different in my opinion, since it was Hamilton that was the one who suggested to the team, if I don't catch the Ferraris, then I'm going to give the position back, and not the other way around. Furthermore, this entire situation for McLaren could have been so easily avoided. As far as I'm aware, the threat from Leclerc was very minimal. At the very worst, Piastri would have had to repass him on track, which given the pace advantage the McLaren had over the Ferrari, I doubt would have been very difficult. Actually thinking about it, maybe they didn't want to risk engaging in a wheel-to-wheel battle with Charles, since this man would have done anything possible to get that podium in Monza. It should have been pretty simple. Just pit the lead car first and you avoid this entirely. But they know they have a comfortable buffer over everybody else, so they can afford to make these kind of questionable choices. If this was a closer contest with some serious drivers involved, these team orders would destroy any chance of them winning the title. It seems like McLaren really want to micromanage this dynamic between Norris and Piastri in the spirit of keeping everything completely equal, when in reality, bad pit stops are a part of racing, as are reliability issues, as are crashes, mistakes, strategy choices, and a lot more. They should just keep the team orders to a bare minimum. Don't crash into each other. First driver on track gets priority with strategy, and both sides of the garage can dictate their own strategy. Now, most of the time, they have followed this philosophy. However, this time around, I feel like they went too far with it, and it sets a dangerous precedent. What if a situation like this occurs at the final race in Abu Dhabi? I can't imagine that either driver would be willing to give up a position. This is a competition. It should be every man for himself. And I've seen a few people even allude to McLaren taking this logic to the extreme and hitting the detonate button on Piastri's engine to make up for what happened to Lando in Zandvoort. And I wouldn't be surprised that if in a future race Piastri has a slow stop and loses a position to Norris, he's going to remind the team of this exact moment. When I first heard the phrase papaya rules in Monza 2024, I couldn't stop laughing at how corny it was. But to be fair, it has done a decent job in maintaining some kind of order within the team. Race hard, race clean, don't crash into each other. It's given both Lando and Oscar the freedom to push each other to the limit without crossing it. But from time to time, it feels like a double-edged sword. This year's Italian Grand Prix felt like another one of those moments where the team intervened too much, rather than letting things play out naturally. Yeah, team orders help in managing two number one drivers, keeping their egos in check, and helping maintain harmony within the garage. But that balance becomes fragile when the rules start to feel like scripted moves rather than something organic. At that point, the entertainment drains away and it's replaced by something that feels too orchestrated. What fans enjoy is when things are unpredictable. Ultimately, papaya rules is both a blessing and a curse. Sometimes it yields exciting moments, and other times it results in an unpopular, boring outcome for the fans, but favourable for team chemistry. To an extent, us fans have been spoiled. 4 years ago, we had a literal war between two generational drivers. Every race featured Hamilton and Verstappen straight up going band for band, showing off how astronomically clear they were of the rest of the grid. Two of the greatest talents Formula 1 has ever seen going at it like straight dogs. Whereas now, we've got whatever McLaren are giving us. Now sometimes, we get some great racing moments between the two. For example, the Austrian Grand Prix. That was just one of those weekends where they were literally untouchable. Lap 11 is when Piastri made his first attack after Norris made a mistake on the exit of turn 1. He's in the slipstream, opens DRS, pulls out to the left and is ahead before the next corner, only for Lando to dip back, take the more optimal line and pull a switch back on Oscar at turn 3. By allowing Piastri to get ahead before the DRS detection zone, he was able to use it to outdrag him heading to turn 4. At this point, he thought he was in the clear, but then Piastri almost ended up the inside at turn 6 before having to back out. He stays within DRS more or less the entire time, which was so impressive because any other car would have destroyed its tyres instantly, or had to manage overheating, which made the racing far more entertaining. In this battle, Lando managed to come out on top with some great driving, also thanks to some help from Alpine, who for some reason came to haunt Oscar that weekend. But at the Belgian Grand Prix, Oscar got his teammate back. From a rolling start, Norris had a slide coming out of turn 1, compromising his exit and consequently his run through a Rouge and onto the Kemmel straight. He was also more cautious going up the hill, while Piastri simply kept his foot in, and ultimately his bravery paid off massively. It was high risk, high reward, and he sailed past his teammate and then to Lecombe in the lead. There were some questions about Lando's battery being depleted on the Kemmel straight, but that was dismissed by Norris himself after the race. From there, Oscar controlled the race perfectly, didn't make a single mistake while out in the lead, while Lando was either locking up or going off track. Now, in fairness to him, he was forced to stay out an extra lap because McLaren couldn't double stack their drivers since they were too close to each other on track. And that caused him to lose a whole lot of time relative to Piastri, and on top of that, he had a slow stop. All in all though, Oscar won that race by being more aggressive at the start, keeping his foot planted through a Rouge and carrying that momentum to sail past Lando on the straight. He won that race by being error-free and capitalizing on his opportunities better than his teammate. But in Hungary, it was a different story. The presence of Charles as the race leader temporarily disrupted the McLaren head-to-head. Since Oscar didn't have the benefit of clean air, he couldn't run off into the distance like in previous races. So he was forced to try and undercut Leclerc in the first stint, which ultimately didn't pay off. But in doing so, he had to make the first move and stop early, while Lando, whose poor start ended up being a blessing in disguise, could casually just sit and watch everything play out. Seeing that his teammate and Charles were now committed to a 2-stop, he decided to extend his first stint and attempt to make the 1-stop work. It was very close in the end. Piastri had a number of opportunities to make an overtake, but at the Hungaroring, it's so difficult to pass, especially when it's your own teammate in the same car ahead of you. So he had to settle for second best. Some people were of the opinion that he was robbed of the win, or that Lando got lucky, which, it's fine to have those opinions as a sports fan, especially in a high-stakes championship. It's normal to feel strongly about the athlete, or in this case driver, you're supporting. But objectively speaking, sometimes strategies work out and sometimes they don't. Track position has proven to be king in this era of Formula 1, and even more so at a high downforce technical track like Hungary. George Russell's drive in Spa last year is the best case study for this, and Lando pretty much did the same thing, which then begs the question of, should teammates be allowed to opt for a different strategy during the race? And to that I say, absolutely. Formula 1 is a competition. The car, the driver, and the strategy all make a difference. And by enforcing strict rules like both drivers have to run the exact same strategy, you're effectively killing the competitive element of racing. Since these regulations have made it impossible to overtake, unless you have a huge pace advantage over the car ahead, the only way to gain such a big advantage is to either have a quicker car or a better strategy. In hindsight, it's very easy to say, if Piastri or even Leclerc had gone for the 1-stop, then either could have won. But the information they had at the time suggested that the 1-stop was more of a gamble and made less sense for the lead car to commit to. Therefore, it made sense to go with a safer option. Had the roles been reversed and Norris been ahead on track, Piastri would have been given the choice to go for the 1-stop and would have had to make it work. And this is something McLaren have actually been consistent with. In Austria, they allowed Oscar to extend his first stint to have fresher tyres to come back at Norris at the end. And in Belgium, Lando was given the hards to make a late race charge on his teammate. In both cases, the gamble didn't work. But in their respective situations, you've got to try something different. McLaren handled those scenarios well, and it resulted in some great battles. Contentious? Sure. But they gave them the freedom to choose alternative strategies and go racing, which is what we all want to see. Whether this decision from McLaren comes back to bite them remains to be seen. There isn't any outward animosity between the two, and given Oscar's compliance, I doubt any resentment will build. However, there might be some awkward conversations that take place behind the scenes, and Monza may be used as a reference if the points gap between Norris and Piastri gets smaller. We've already seen that very fine margins are making a huge difference this year. In addition, drivers that I would refer to as disruptors, such as Verstappen, Russell and Leclerc, will also cause problems from time to time. And overall, both McLaren drivers have been extremely closely matched, more than any other pairing on the grid. For me, this all comes back to Zandvoort. McLaren probably felt sympathy for Lando after retiring from the race through no fault of his own. And one has to ask themselves, would they have requested for the drivers to swap positions had this not happened? Equally, would Piastri have let his championship rival past if the points gap was much smaller? My opinion, no he wouldn't, but I guess we'll never know. Across the season as a whole, Lando has proven to be the more error-prone driver. Those early races, he kept fumbling one way or another. The sprint in China, the entire weekend in Bahrain and Jeddah, and the biggest one being his misjudgment in Canada. But those mistakes don't have to overshadow the moments where he's been absolutely clinical. And he deserves credit for the times where he's been on the money. The first race in Australia, the pole lap in Monaco, his defense in Austria. And as for Oscar, well, in my opinion, he's been amazing this year. The progress that he's made between year 2 and year 3 is really impressive. His quali pace, the race management, and the one thing that's always really stood out to me about him is his wheel-to-wheel IQ. His overtaking ability is just genius. And it's what won him races, like Jeddah at the start with Max. Then in Miami, again with the Dutchman, he timed his moves to perfection. Verstappen himself was being forced to defend fresh air because he knows Piastri is very skilled in wheel-to-wheel combat. And then in Spa, with that move on the first lap. Nevertheless, he too has had his fair share of mistakes, with the biggest one being Australia. And in Imola, giving Verstappen way too much space at turn 1. And then there was Silverstone, where he effectively lost the win due to driving erratically. It's going to be very interesting to see though exactly who will have the advantage in the upcoming races, because the first 2 races we've had post-summer break have honestly been so surprising. I expected Lando to have the advantage in Zandvoort like he did last year, but Piastri picked his moment perfectly in qualifying, snatching pole away by the finest of margins, and then going on to control the race extremely well. Then in Monza, the Red Bull was extremely competitive, but to be fair, the track layout played more to McLaren's weaknesses than strengths. The remaining races should favour McLaren a lot more than Monza did. Specifically those tracks with lots of medium speed corners, they're going to be untouchable. But then tracks like Vegas and Qatar, for example, I feel like another team could potentially cause an upset, which means both Lando and Oscar will have to factor in other drivers besides each other. Then there's the reliability aspect. One more DNF for Norris and that could be game over. But equally, one DNF for Piastri and it could be all to play for again. Hopefully, it will be a close battle to the end. Maybe this is a season that's going to be decided at the final race in Abu Dhabi. Will it be Oscar or will it be Lando? Who knows? But all I want to see as a spectator is an out-and-out battle from here on. Both drivers doing everything in their power to win. No more orchestrated swaps, no more manufactured fairness, just pure competition. I hope you all enjoyed. Let me know what you thought of McLaren's decision and who you think will win the Drivers' Championship down in the comment section below. Please like, share and subscribe to the channel if you're new to get my latest videos in the future. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.